On June 13, 2025, after spending almost 20 years on death row, Stephen Stanko was executed by lethal injection in South Carolina. In this video, we'll uncover what happened, his last meal, and his last words. Stephen Stanko knew how to present himself. On the surface, he looked like a man rebuilding his life, a thoughtful, well-spoken ex-con with a book under his belt and a story to tell. But that book was born out of a decade-long sentence for assault and kidnapping handed down in 1996, of which he served nearly 9 years. After his release in 2004, Stephen headed to Myrtle Beach, where he rented a room in a quiet neighborhood. He wasn't flashy, didn't throw parties. He paid rent, though not always on time, and mostly kept to himself. His parole officer warned the landlady about his past, but she wasn't surprised. Stephen had already told her. He didn't want any secrets, at least not yet. At first, Stephen seemed to settle into life outside. He told people he was trying to move on, but that finding work with a felony record wasn't easy. He bounced between a couple of short-lived jobs, then abruptly left town, saying he was going to help care for a friend's elderly mother. But that wasn't the truth, not even close. Roughly a year after walking free, Stephen began spending long hours at the public library. He told people he was working on a book about serial killers, said he wanted to turn his life around. But his time there turned into something darker. He got close to a librarian named Laura Ling, who was 43 years old. She was kind and trusting, and eventually Stephen moved in with her and her 15-year-old daughter. Around the same time, he struck up conversations with Henry Turner, a 74-year-old library regular. Just small talk between strangers. But Henry had no idea who Stephen really was, or what he was capable of. That changed in April 2005. On April 7th, inside Laura's home, Stephen snapped. He claimed they had argued, that Laura slapped him, and that the lit cigarette in his hand got caught between his glasses and his skin, and then everything went black. He tied Laura's hands behind her back and beat her. Then he walked down the hallway toward her sleeping daughter. "Scream and I'll kill you both," he told her. She tried to reach her mother, but by the time she stepped into the bedroom, Laura was already on the floor, moaning and barely conscious. Before she could react, he struck her in the head and she blacked out. When she came to, Stephen was on top of her. She kicked, fought, clawed, but he was too strong. Afterward, he dragged her into the bedroom where Laura was still fighting to stay alive. Her daughter thought, "This is how I'm going to die." Then she saw him wrap his hands around Laura's throat, and another thought hit her. Don't let this happen. Be the girl who died saving her mom. Stephen strangled Laura, flipped her onto her stomach, and finished it. Then he turned to her daughter, took a knife, and slit her throat, twice. Then he stepped over her and walked to the shower. Calm, controlled. He claims that's when his memory came back. He checked for a pulse on both of them, but there was none. And instead of calling the police or seeking help, he packed a bag, stepped over the daughter's bleeding body, and left. He thought she was dead, but she wasn't. Bleeding and broken, the girl managed to dial 911.
Can I help you? Pardon me?
I'm at my house and I've been...
Okay. What's your address?
Mom is dead.
Pardon?
My mom is dead.
Soon after, help arrived, but not fast enough for her mother. And Stephen? He was already gone. He had taken Laura's credit cards and some of her jewelry, then drove to Conway, straight to Henry's house. He told him his father had just died and asked if he could stay there for a while. Henry, kind as ever, didn't ask questions. He let him in. That night, Stephen slept under Henry's roof, and the next morning, April 8th, they had breakfast together, eggs, toast, and coffee. But Henry had no idea he was sharing a table with a man who had just killed his girlfriend in cold blood. Later, as Henry stood in the bathroom shaving, his back turned and completely unaware, Stephen walked in quietly, raised a gun, pressed a pillow against it to muffle the sound, and pulled the trigger. Henry dropped to the floor, wounded but still breathing, and Stephen didn't hesitate. He struck him in the head, then fired again, this time into his chest. And just like that, a quiet morning had turned into a silent execution. Stephen cleared out Henry's bank account, stole his truck, and hit the road again. And by that night, he was in Columbia, South Carolina, using the money to buy strangers drinks at local bars, smiling, charming, and blending in like he hadn't just murdered 2 people in 2 days. And after that, he drove to Augusta, Georgia. But what Stephen didn't know was that he had left behind a storm. His name was already spreading, and a nationwide manhunt had started. There even was a $10,000 reward on his head, and it was only a matter of time. In Augusta, Stephen introduced himself as a businessman who owned several Hooters restaurants. Said he was in town for the Masters golf tournament. He looked the part, confident, well-spoken, like a man with money and connections. And that's how he met her, a woman who had no reason to doubt him. He charmed her, told her stories, and went home with her. She believed what he said, because why wouldn't she? Stephen spent days living under her roof, but on April 12th, just after midnight, he vanished. By morning, the woman opened her newspaper and froze. There he was, Stephen Stanko, on the front page, wanted for a double murder. She didn't hesitate and immediately picked up the phone to call the police. Within hours, the U.S. Marshals closed in, and before Stephen could disappear from Augusta, they had him in cuffs. The man who once wrote a book from behind bars was sent back, and this time for good. When investigators searched his home, they found something that shook even the most seasoned officers. Stacks of articles and clippings about Jeffrey Dahmer, Gary Ridgway, and other serial killers. One officer put it plainly: he either was just interested in serial killers or he was becoming one. But what brought Stephen Stanko to do something like this? Stephen was born on a military base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and from the outside, it looked like discipline and structure were built into his life from the start. But the cracks began early. In 1983, at just 15 years old, Stephen lost his younger brother Billy in a house fire. Officially, the cause remained undetermined, and the case was never solved, but whispers of arson surrounded the tragedy. After that, something inside the family shifted. Stephen's father, once strict but present, pulled away devastated and angry. Eventually, he turned his back on Stephen altogether. Still, he had promise. At 17, he landed in the 85th percentile on the SAT with a 500 verbal and 620 math. His dream was to join the Air Force Academy. But when that dream was crushed in 1986 with a rejection letter, something in him broke. He tried community college and bounced between ideas, but nothing stuck. And not long after, the drifting turned to stealing, and that opened the door to something much darker. Then, in 1992, 24-year-old Stephen began dating Liz. And on the surface, he came off as charming, maybe a little odd, but nothing she couldn't live with. But then the lies started. Fake business ventures, stealing from neighbors, and sketchy behavior that never added up. And the more she asked questions, the more he dodged. Then came the night she woke up to him standing over her, silent, just watching. And before she could scream, he tried to smother her. She begged him to stop, told him she would never speak of it again if he left her alone. And surprisingly, he did, but only for a little while. On February 20th, 1996, everything exploded. He and Liz got into a violent physical fight. When it was over, she went to bed, exhausted and shaken. But hours later, she woke up to the strong smell of bleach. Stephen was standing over her with a soaked rag and attacked her out of nowhere. And not long after, cops showed up to find Liz tied up. Stephen was arrested and charged with kidnapping. And in April 1996, a grand jury indicted him on a long list of charges. Kidnapping, assault and battery with intent to kill, 9 counts of breach of trust with fraudulent intent, and 2 counts of obtaining property by false pretenses. He had taken a job at a car dealership, then turned around and stole both new and used cars, selling them off to Liz's neighbor. By the end of it all, Stephen was facing the full weight of it, 10 years in prison. And it all could have ended there. But for Stephen, it was only the beginning. In 2006, Stephen went to trial for Laura's murder. He pleaded insanity, but the jury didn't buy it. They found him guilty and sentenced him to death. And on top of that, he got 110 years for kidnapping and sexually assaulting Laura's daughter. Then, in 2009, he stood trial again, this time for Henry's murder. And this time, the verdict was the same. The jury found him guilty and gave him another death sentence. For years, Stephen fought to overturn the outcome. His lawyers filed appeal after appeal, arguing he had mental defects and that the courts didn't fully consider his age or cognitive issues. But the courts didn't budge. Every effort failed, both at state and federal level. Stephen would spend the next 20 years on death row. Then, on May 5, 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final petition, and just 11 days later, the state set a date, June 13, 2025. Stephen had until May 30th to choose his method, electric chair, firing squad, or lethal injection. And at one point, he leaned toward the firing squad. He said it seemed quick, clean, but after reading what happened to Mikal Mahdi, Stephen started having second thoughts. Mikal had been the second man executed by firing squad in South Carolina this year, and on paper, the process sounded simple. 3 bullets, no blanks, fired straight to the heart. But when his legal team released the autopsy report, it told a different story. Only 1 bullet had pierced a heart chamber, and the others missed the vital points, which meant he didn't die quickly. His lawyers said he likely suffered for 3 or 4 times longer than expected, and witnesses reported hearing him groan 45 seconds after the shots were fired. And there were other issues. There was only 1 photo taken at Mikal's autopsy, and that one showed 2 wounds in his chest. Officials claimed 3 bullets were fired, saying 2 had entered through the same hole. But there were no X-rays, no clothing analysis, no ballistic trajectory tests. Nothing that would allow independent experts to verify these findings. This changed everything for Stephen, and just a few days later, he chose lethal injection instead. On Friday, June 13, 2025, Stephen's time ran out. That evening, he was strapped to the gurney with one arm outstretched, where medical staff inserted an IV line to administer the lethal drug. Outside the prison, protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Who would Jesus execute?" and "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Inside, it was colder, quieter. The execution began after Stephen's attorneys read a 3.5-minute final statement. In it, Stephen apologized to his victims and asked not to be judged by the worst day of his life. "I am truly sorry for the pain and loss that I caused in this horrible situation. Sorry is never enough, but that does not mean it should not be said." When the signal came, the prison officials asked for the first dose of the sedative pentobarbital. Stephen moved his lips, appearing to be saying words, and turned toward the families of the victims. He then let out several quick breaths as his lips quivered. He appeared to stop breathing after a minute. A prison employee asked for a second dose of pentobarbital about 13 minutes later. Stephen was pronounced dead at 6:34 p.m. His final meal has not yet been publicly disclosed. Keep an eye on the comments for updates. Stephen Christopher Stanko was 57 years old.